Welcome back to another special episode, a holiday episode. Happy Thanksgiving of Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. I am the NFL columnist and Giants beat writer at the New York Daily News. And of course, we've turned to football weather now. It's cold, it's windy, the elements are affecting games. The healthy teams and the hot teams are getting on a roll and pushing towards the postseason. Some are falling off. Even though the regular season still has a long way to go here, though, before we get to the playoffs and postseason, it's always important to understand that the NFL coaching and GM carousel is constantly moving. There is so much information, discussions, back and forth, and gauging going on behind the scenes and from teams, from agents, from coaches, from general managers, and people in front offices. People are keeping eyes on the jobs that have come open, the jobs that may come open, and the candidates who might be best to fill them. And so every year I like to do a story in the New York Daily News, and I want to bring it to our listeners this week about the job openings that could happen in the NFL, where there's never been more turnover and more frequent turnover at these key positions in organizations, as well as the hottest names that I'm hearing from talking to league sources reporting around the league, doing my Sunday NFL notes column for the New York Daily News. Before we get to that, just want to tell you about Bet Online. Basketball is back, and Bet Online remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at Bet Online. And as your continued source for all sports wagering information, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports and events, whether that's NFL, NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. Head to BetOnline AG to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. That's betonline.ag. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE, capital BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet online, betonline.ag, where the game starts. And where we start, before we talk about the candidates to watch, let's tell you what we're hearing and what I'm hearing about the job openings that we could be looking at. Now, let's remember last year, even when there were a lot of openings predicted and foreseen, we had 10 head coaching changes after the 2021 NFL season. There are only 32 teams in the NFL. That's almost a third of the league. Would you believe it if I told you that it wouldn't be out of the picture if that happened again after the 2022 season? Unlikely that we reach the number 10. But there are that many teams that, whether you want to include sure things, jobs that have already opened, potential surprises, all of this has to do, obviously, with which teams ascend and which teams descend, and which owners get impatient and which stay patient. So this is all couched with, things change in week 12, week 13, week 14, etc. That said, I'm telling you what I am hearing, and you have to take all of it as the understanding that this is where it stands. Things can change, but this is where you should keep an eye if you are an NFL fan of any team in the league right now. So obviously there are two openings already. We have the Carolina Panthers, who fired Matt Rule, and we have the Indianapolis Colts, who fired Frank Reich. So those openings already exist. Other situations to monitor from talking to people around the league: the Detroit Lions, but of course now I think they've won 3 in a row. So, like I said, situations can change if a team goes on a run and makes the playoffs, right? Obviously. But when I say the Detroit Lions, I say if things go back down and the defense doesn't figure it out and the offense stops scoring and they go in the tank, so to speak. So the Detroit Lions are one to keep an eye on. The Houston Texans with Lovie Smith. Obviously, that's an organization. There's been a lot of turmoil in leadership positions, and the Texans are trending toward having the number one pick. There's a good chance Lovie Smith might not be the head coach who is sitting there in the draft room when that pick is made. We'll see where that goes. The Las Vegas Raiders, Josh McDaniels, first year coach. There's been reporting that Mark Davis and the Raiders can't afford to fire Josh McDaniels because Davis, the owner, is cash poor. I wouldn't necessarily say that is a certainty that he wouldn't lose his job. But again, We see they beat the Broncos. Maybe they start figuring out as the season goes on, because now without as much practice time in off seasons and without as many games in the preseason, and guys don't play as much in the preseason, what you see in the NFL now is a lot of coaches behind the scenes will tell you, my team isn't what I think it should look like or what it's going to look like until week 5, 6, 7, 8, because they view the first 4 games of the regular season almost as an extended preseason of getting guys in game shape, making sure that your systems are correct, adjusting how you're game planning, and players just really getting into the flow of their bodies taking these hits and being able to sustain and stay at a high level. So because of that, we have teams late in the year who, like the Raiders, who could start poorly and then mid-season could really look like they just turned it on and flipped the switch. But it might be because, and this is the opinion of some coaches in the league, a lot of coaches in the league, that especially in a first year program, it just took some time and they don't practice as much in the offseason. So now, hey, look, our product's better because we've actually been on the field more. But the Raiders are still one to watch if things go very poorly there. We also have the Denver Broncos. I probably should have mentioned this one first. This could be at the top of the list with Nate Hackett. When he gives up play calling this past week on offense, listen, Russell Wilson has a lot of power there. And I know he's the head coach, Nate Hackett, and I know George Payton is the GM. But if he gave up play calling, it's because Russell Wilson wanted it to happen that way. As my understanding of how much say so the quarterback has on how this functions. And so that's a bad sign for Nate Hackett. And anyway, when a coach does something like that, that he didn't intend to or want to do, usually it's the first step towards trying to find any way to turn it around before the worst case scenario. I hope Hackett doesn't lose his job. I don't want anybody to lose their jobs, but that is obviously, it's not even trending in the wrong direction. It's already in the wrong direction. And with new ownership there in Denver, new money, and so much invested in Wilson, all these arrows and signs point to Hackett possibly not making it through year one and into year two, but we will see. And then the Arizona Cardinals are another one. The Cardinals and Cliff Kingsbury just doesn't look like a tight enough operation, from things you hear, from what you see when you watch. I think the Kyler Murray homework clause that eventually got taken out, just a good example of some of the dysfunction or poor decisions being made there. And like every team on this list, if they start winning, then things could change. But this definitely, and Steve Keim, the GM there, has a lot of power as well, and he has survived several mistakes. So not sure if he would survive here or not. It seems like Michael Bidwell, the owner, and Keim are attached at the hip essentially, and he's his guy. If it were me and this continued on the wrong track, I would blow it all up. So we'll see if Bidwell goes for that. But to me, the Broncos and the Cardinals, along with the Texans and the teams I just mentioned, are probably the highest on that list there. And then some possible surprises here. Um, well, Washington was looking like a potential surprise slash eventuality. Is new ownership coming in, and things were going wrong there. But obviously, Ron Rivera with Taylor Heineke at quarterback, things are starting to look up. They actually have a chance to make the playoffs if they can sustain this here. So obviously, that wouldn't happen if they keep winning and playing well. Um, but these are the ones that intrigued me the most. These 3 teams. Ready for this? So these are teams that I talk to people around the league that I trust, who are extremely plugged in to the coaching circuit, to the GM circuit, and to the league, who give you a really good finger on the pulse of where it stands and what they foresee, and then what could happen if certain dominoes fall. The Dallas Cowboys, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Cleveland Browns. Now, the Cowboys, obviously, if Mike McCarthy wins and the Cowboys go on a deep run, that's one thing. But Dan Quinn, and we'll get to the top candidates in a minute. Dan Quinn is one of the top head coaching candidates coming into this next cycle. He was high on the Giants list. The Cowboys did a lot to make him stay. He pulled his name out of the Giants running when he was a strong contender to get the head coaching job under Joe Shane. And there is a belief or a feeling that, the Cowboys would not be able to keep Dan Quinn into 2023 as their defensive coordinator. They would either have to promote him to head coach or he'll end up getting a job somewhere else. So that is the hot flame behind and beneath Mike McCarthy and the incentive to keep winning. But obviously, we see they roll against the Vikings, and if they beat the Giants on Thanksgiving, you know, then but it'll be fascinating to follow no matter what. Because if the Cowboys succeed and don't intend to make a coaching change, losing Quinn would be a huge deal from this defense, right? You know, with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and these guys. So that's a fascinating situation to follow either way. Brandon Staley's Chargers obviously put up a good fight recently against the Chiefs. Staley is still a relatively new coach, but as a guy who came in as a defensive coach, the defense does not look anywhere close to where you would want it. Justin Herbert getting healthier obviously helps the coach and the team. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, when they are on the field, Williams has really struggled to stay on the field. Allen just came back. You saw the difference he made on offense. Williams couldn't last it through the game. So if I'm Brandon Staley, obviously I would say, well, my quarterback was hurt early season. My top receivers have been out, and that would all be fair as well. But still something to watch because some of their games, especially early, and like I said, the defensive game plans. And I'm not talking about against the Chiefs, who have one of the top offenses and who have the NFL's MVP and Patrick Mahomes, but just consistently, it doesn't seem they have strong enough answers. And Tom Telesco, the GM there, if this went all the way south and the Chargers were, as disappointing at the end of this season, let's say, as the Raiders and the Broncos, and kind of mixed in and couldn't even say that they were the second tier behind the Chiefs. That's a whole regime I think that you should keep an eye on. And there is some belief among some people, and we're getting into the candidates here. One more job to talk about. There is some belief around the league that Sean Payton has eyes for that job, the Chargers job. So Sean Payton is still under contract with the Saints. So at the moment, you would have to trade things to the Saints, or work out some kind of deal to get Payton from them. Even though he is retired, he is still technically, part of the Saints. The Saints have control of him. So, but that's the word on the street that, and listen, that makes sense. Offensive coach out in the sun in Los Angeles, Justin Herbert. I mean, who wouldn't want that job? But that's some juicy stuff there, obviously. And then the Cleveland Browns, Kevin Stefanski. And again, like I said before, don't want anybody to lose their job. This is just talking to people in the league and what they tell me. I think Cleveland obviously has been a mess from ownership on down with the Deshaun Watson decision and trade and signing and the contract that they gave him. Obviously, a lot of owners are angry at the Haslams for giving Watson that deal. And you can make an easy argument if you're Stefanski that, with Baker Mayfield and now being handed this mess with Watson, like, well, what am I working with here, right? But there are people in the league keeping an eye on the Cleveland situation. If they keep losing and then Watson's return goes poorly, both on and off the field. So the names to watch. So we already talked about, for candidates, we already talked about Dan Quinn and Sean Payton. I actually hadn't thought of this name at first because I was thinking more of assistants who could rise to become head coaches when I started asking around. But Frank Reich, like, when Doug Peterson, for example, got fired by the Eagles, he ends up taking a year off. Then he returns and becomes the Jaguars head coach. And when all these guys get fired, they're normally, still under contract for a year or 2 years and extra years. Reich had gotten a new deal, I believe. So if he didn't return to coaching, he would just continue to get paid by the Colts. If he did return to coaching, then the team he joins would pay him a certain number. And then if his Colts salary were higher, the Colts would just have to pay him the difference. So, for example, if he's due to make $5 million in 2023 from the Colts, if the Cleveland Browns hired Frank Reich and paid him $3 million for that year, the Browns would pay him the 3 and the Colts would pay him 2, right? So they would subtract 3 from the 5 they owe. But this is all about, obviously, it spiraled quickly there for Reich. And he was a part of the regime with Chris Ballard there, trying to find an answer at quarterback, failing to do so. And then the Colts looking kind of so dead there midseason. I still don't agree with what Jim Irsay did. But it really comes down to Reich is a respected former player and a current coach who, if he wants to return to the league immediately, there will certainly be interviews available, and I would think there would be a job for him there. I do believe that Reich will try to re-enter the fold immediately and will be a factor in those coaching interviews. Something to understand, though, there are coaching candidates, and Frank Reich could be one of them. I don't know. We'll see. That you could be here, like I could be hearing, and I know I am hearing it's true that Reich will be a factor, and I expect him to get interviews. But coaches can be savvy and GMs can be savvy. These candidates can be savvy about not just taking any job. There are some coaches who they would get offered an NFL head coaching job and they would take one anywhere. And listen, I mean, I would, to be able to say I did and to make all that money and yeah, let's do it. But especially if you're a coach who's been through it and gone through and see how different organizations operate, some are more efficient than others. And if you've gotten fired and had a bad experience from one, you really want that second job to be a stable one, to one that you can rely upon the people there and know that if it fails, it's not going to be because of a poor structure or leadership above you. It's going to be simply the team didn't perform. So Reich could be the kind of guy who interviewed in certain places, but would only accept certain jobs that he felt were advantageous based on personnel or based on the leadership of those organizations from the top down. You would think, as I mentioned with Sean Payton and the Chargers and Justin Herbert, that the presence of a quarterback would be the starting point for Frank Reich because he's, I would imagine, exhausted from trying to find one who would work out for his offense and failing. And then, so we have Reich, Sean Payton, and Dan Quinn. Then we have the list of assistant coaches who it's a combination of hot names whose teams are also doing well. So a lot of these guys have had interviews before, and then their teams are doing well now. DeMeco Ryans, the defensive coordinator for the Niners, is at the top of the list. I would think he'll get a job if the Niners continue on the track they're on. I would think he'll be a head coach next season. The Eagles coordinators, I mean, Jonathan Gannon, the DC, was a hot name last year. The Texans really liked him, among others. He and Shane Steichen, the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, both of those guys I would think will receive interviews. The Giants coordinators, Mike Kafka, the OC, Wink Martindale, the DC, both hot names right now based on what they've done with what they've been given with that roster with the Giants. The Bills coordinators, Ken Dorsey, obviously his first year taking over for Brian Dable, and Leslie Frazier, the DC, has been a big name out there, a former head coach, and a guy who, if the Bills have the right kind of success at the end of the season and on defense, could easily get that next opportunity. Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys. So that means, both Dallas coordinators there, Quinn and Kellen Moore, and Byron Leftwich, the offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a guy whose time and opportunity may be overdue. And then, there's some teams, Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs OC, I would think he would continue probably to get some interviews. I don't know if he would get a job. The Bengals coordinators are both hot names. It just really has to do with the Bengals winning down the stretch like they did last year again. But Brian Callahan, the offensive coordinator, and then Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator, who the Giants interviewed this past year, both guys who are really respected, who people in the league expect both to be head coaches if the Bengals continue to have success. Greg Roman, I should have mentioned him as well. That's the OC for the Baltimore Ravens. Another guy who should get some interviews. And then, that I went through a lot of those names I just mentioned are teams who are having success. And, when teams have success, they go to the playoffs, they go to the Super Bowl, their names get bigger in the headlines, and a lot of them end up getting jobs. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But there also are some names of people around the league who, even though their teams aren't winning right now, are still popping in my ears, and people around the league are talking about a lot and are considered big time candidates, even if their teams aren't, blowing people out of the water. So, two guys from the Rams, Raheem Morris, the defensive coordinator. That's no secret. The Rams love him too, though. So, would it be difficult to get him? What's going on with Sean McVay, who you keep hearing things about how he might hang it up. He looks miserable on the sidelines. He's going to hang it up when certain players leave, all these reports. So Raheem Morris could be the kind of guy who they don't want to let him out. And then, if McVay pulls his crazy, not crazy, but if McVay decides based on how he's feeling that, what, I need to take a break or this is it for me as a head coach, then maybe he gets the promotion and Morris is the guy. But there's another guy in Los Angeles to keep an eye on, and that is assistant head coach Thomas Brown. He was coaching the running backs last year. I believe he's with the tight ends now this year. Had an interview with the Dolphins last year before the Dolphins hired Mike McDaniel from the 49ers. Obviously, that's going well. But Brown is considered a leader, kind of, a uh, a guy who could manage the entire operation. You have certain coaches who are offensive minds and want to call plays, and then certain coaches who say, I'm a defensive coach, like a Robert Saleh who oversees the whole thing, but the defense is his thing. What I talk to people in Los Angeles and with the Rams and around the Rams, they tell me that Brown, he could be like that CEO, the guy who's running the show, the guy who is the great front facing face and voice of your franchise, who players in the Rams organization really respect. So there's a lot of keep watching the coaches in Los Angeles. And obviously, the McVay tree has a fair amount of success at landing head coaching jobs as well. So no secret there. Bubba Ventrone, the special teams coach for the Colts, maybe based on the Colts' turmoil, getting a job would be more difficult, but getting interviews and continuing on a track of being well respected. He has stepped in or had stepped in as the interim several times when Frank Reich, was out sick going back to last couple years. Ventrone took over and did a lot behind the scenes there, and showed his leadership skills. So that's another guy I know that people are keeping an eye on. And then a couple others. Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, who I just saw his offense in person. Lions have scored 31 or more points 5 times out of 10 games with Jared Goff at quarterback. I think now everybody is just talking about the Lions offense as if, oh yeah, they're good. The Lions offense is good. But coming into the season, nobody thought that. Nobody thought the Lions were going to be some, juggernaut on offense. But they have won 3 in a row and are looking like a team who could make some noise down the stretch, mainly because of Johnson's offense there. And so that's one to keep an eye on as well, just in future years too. Like some of these guys, if their team doesn't win and they lose down the stretch, they don't make the playoffs, some things go wrong, whatever, if they're in their first year, it doesn't mean that getting an interview would mean they'll get a job. There's a graduation to some of this sometimes. But these are names also not just to remember for now, but for the future. And then the Broncos defensive coordinator, I believe his name is pronounced Ejiro Evero. I hope I said that correctly. I should have done my homework on that, like the great Doc Emmerich always did in those hockey locker rooms that I was in, sitting down next to every player and asking him right to his face, how do I say your name? How do I pronounce this? That's a true pro. I usually do my best to do that. But the Broncos defensive coordinator is a guy who, despite Nate Hackett and the Broncos failing, obviously they have one of the best defenses in the league, and that's opened a lot of eyes over there. So something to keep an eye on. And then real quickly, just some GMs to look out for. Like I mentioned, I said that the Charger situation could be one to watch. Who knows if the Cardinals will finally bring some accountability to that chair if they decide to make changes. And obviously there could be others to watch, but some candidates that people are saying to keep an eye on: the Giants assistant GM, Brandon Brown in his first year with the Giants came from the Eagles. One league source told me flat out he's outstanding. And you can see some of what the Giants have done to be able to scotch tape this season and this team together and try to make their way through into 2023. Brown is a huge part of Joe Shane's operation. He will be a GM one day. Elliot Wolf, the Patriots scouting director, people telling me this is a when, not if guy. Like he's going to be a GM. It's just a question of when, not if, from the Patriots. And then on the list as well, the Colts, Morocco Brown. He's their chief personnel executive. The Bills director of player personnel, Terrence Gray, somebody to watch. Excuse me. The Bucks VP of player personnel, John Spytek. 49ers assistant GM Adam Peters obviously was a finalist for the Giants job that Joe Shane got, along with Ryan Poles, who went to the Bears. Chiefs assistant GM Mike Borgonzi and ex-Vikings GM Rick Spielman, if he decides to wade back in. I love the coaching and GM carousel. I love that time of year, but it's always I'm not sure fans recognize, and that's why I wanted to bring this to your attention now, that this work happens much earlier and is continually monitored, and then these conversations occur. And even though you hear about it only really in January and February, I am hearing about it and talking to people about it throughout the fall as all these games are being played. Fascinating business, fascinating to follow all of these coaches and GMs' careers and how these organizations operate. And I hope you gleaned a lot of information and took some notes, maybe even for when you're following us in January and February. You can grade me on what we saw with openings, with candidates being hired, and we will be doing dogged reporting during that time as well, possibly while covering Giants playoff football. You never know. All right, welcome back to Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. Let's get over to Pat's picks. I'm going to pick the 3 Thanksgiving games, and then you can find all the rest of my picks presented by BetOnline on Instagram on Friday. So let's go right to the holiday and start with the Buffalo Bills -9 at the Detroit Lions. 9-point favorites, a large line even for the Buffalo Bills. The Bills and Lions both have scored 30 or more points in 5 of their 10 games, so in half of their games. The difference between the teams is that the Lions are allowing 28 points per game on defense. The Bills D is holding opponents to 17.4. I still think the 9 is a little bit too rich for me, given that Detroit inside at home, even in some of the games that they have lost, they've kind of charged back and scored a bunch of points late. They have a lot of weapons out there on the field. They can run the ball and throw the ball. They're pretty balanced. Injuries are a factor this time of year for every side. The Bills could round into form coming off of 2 weeks ago with that terrible loss to the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, they stomped the Cleveland Browns in this same stadium, and now they come back. So familiar confines, given that strange snowstorm that hit. But I like the Lions here. I'm going to take the Lions. It's just a large 9-point spread there. The home dog, give me Detroit. Going to Dallas against the Giants. The Cowboys hosting 9-point favorites now on BetOnline. It started at 8 and 8.5 in some places. BetOnline had it at 8.5 on Sunday, and then on Monday moves to 9 after the injury news on Adoree Jackson, the corner, and Wan'Dale Robinson, the receiver, both being out long term. I think the Giants have been fortunate and well coached to overcome their injuries to this point this season, but I think it's finally catching up to them, including on this short week where they will probably struggle to get back key players who've been out, like Evan Neal, Azeez Ojulari, and Daniel Bellinger, the tight end. These are players, especially Ojulari, who, if this were a regular week and there were a game on Sunday, he might be able to go, but Thursday puts him more in jeopardy. We will see what happens there. But losing players and then struggling to get some back as well on a short week, I think spells doom for the Giants, and I think the Cowboys roll. Give me Dallas. And then this is the hardest one to me. Vikings -3 hosting the Patriots. Minnesota obviously laid an egg at home against Dallas, and it would be easy to overreact to that. I'm not picking the Patriots because of the Vikings laying that egg. I'm picking the Patriots because when I look at Minnesota, I see that Christian Darrisaw, their left tackle, is out Thursday. I see that Zadarius Smith on the defensive line, he played through a knee injury that had him questionable in this game against Dallas and wasn't nearly the factor he has been through most of the season. We don't know, obviously, no crystal ball, what's going to happen with injuries on both sides until we get, 2 hours, an hour and a half before the game. But Minnesota, to me, this feels like this will be more of a dogfight than it should be based on the team's record, and even Minnesota being a very difficult place to play for opponents. I think Belichick coaching against Kevin O'Connell. O'Connell's done a great job as a rookie coach, but I like the coaching advantage for New England. I think Belichick will know, as he does every week, the game plan that is best to help his team win and keep it close. And so even if the Patriots lose this game, I think they will manage to keep the game close and play the game on their terms, especially with some of the Vikings' top players either not playing or not being fully healthy. So give me the Patriots there as well. And that'll do it for another episode of Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. Please remember to like, review, subscribe on YouTube, on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, wherever you listen. We thank you so much for your loyalty, and we will see you next time.